One week before Christmas, I overheard my parents planning to use me as free childcare without even bothering to ask. I did not scream. I did not argue. I quietly booked a luxury trip instead. On Christmas Eve, my mother called me screaming through the phone. "Why are not you here yet? Everyone is waiting. The kids are destroying the house." I simply laughed, took a sip of my cocktail, and said, "Do not wait up. I am enjoying my own vacation." Her voice disappeared into a stunned silence as absolute chaos erupted behind her. I hung up the phone and smiled at the ocean. But to understand how I finally walked away from decades of toxic family expectations, we have to go back to the exact moment the match was lit. I am Tessa, 33 years old. To the outside world, my family is the absolute epitome of Atlanta excellence. My father, James, is the charismatic pastor of a massive, highly influential church. My mother, Vivian, plays the role of the perfect first lady, always draped in designer clothes and flashing a practiced camera-ready smile. We are supposed to be a shining example of success. But behind the stained glass and the tailored suits, the reality of being a daughter in this family is suffocating. I am the middle child and in their eyes the ultimate disappointment. My older sister Nia is the golden child. She secured her status by marrying Connor, a loud, arrogant, white tech entrepreneur who treats our family like an exotic accessory he acquired. My younger brother Darius followed suit by marrying Lauren, a wealthy white woman who speaks to me with a permanent tone of condescension. In my parents' eyes, Nia and Darius successfully assimilated into high society. They represent wealth, status, and the perfect image. And then there is me. I am single. I wear understated business clothes, and I do not parade my achievements. Because I do not brag, my family assumes I am an entry-level office worker scraping by. They have no idea that I am the founder and CEO of a private equity firm managing billions in assets. To them, I am just Tessa, the unmarried, socially inept failure who owes them a debt of gratitude simply for existing in their orbit. To truly grasp the depth of their delusion, you have to understand the specific architecture of my childhood. In the grand, highly orchestrated theater of my parents' lives, children were not meant to be nurtured. They were meant to be utilized as props. Nia was the beautiful, photogenic prop. From the age of 5, my mother entered her into elite beauty pageants and high society cotillions, parading her around as the ultimate prize. Darius was the male heir, the golden boy, who could do no wrong in my father's patriarchal eyes. Whenever Darius failed a class or wrecked a luxury car, my father would simply write a massive check to the school or the dealership, calling it a test of faith. And then there was me. I was not particularly interested in makeup or designer clothes, which thoroughly disgusted my mother. I was highly analytical, introverted, and preferred reading financial history books over attending country club mixers, which deeply embarrassed my father. By the time I was 12, they had implicitly agreed on my permanent role in the family, the designated servant. I distinctly remember my 16th Christmas. The church was hosting its annual mega gala for its wealthiest donors. My mother had purchased Nia a stunning custom-made silk gown that cost more than most people's cars. Darius was gifted a vintage Rolex watch. When I came downstairs in a simple off-the-rack dress I had bought with my own babysitting money, my mother looked at me with sheer revulsion. She didn't offer me a gift. Instead, she handed me a clipboard and a headset. While my siblings danced and drank sparkling cider with the children of politicians, I spent 8 agonizing hours in the freezing kitchen hallway, coordinating the catering staff and organizing the coats of the wealthy guests. When my father gave his grand speech that night, he pointed to Nia and Darius as shining examples of God's favor, entirely omitting my existence. When a prominent donor later asked my mother where her middle daughter was, I overheard her sigh and say, "Tessa is finding her purpose in service. She lacks the natural grace for leadership, so we are teaching her humility." That was the exact moment the naive, desperate-for-love child inside me permanently died. I realized with absolute chilling clarity that they would never love me. They did not possess the capacity for it. To them, love was a transactional currency, and because I did not inflate their egos or enhance their aesthetic, my account was perpetually overdrawn. I stopped seeking their approval the very next morning. I stopped arguing when they insulted my clothes. I stopped crying when they forgot my birthdays. I retreated entirely into my own mind, transforming my silent obedience into a weapon. They thought my quiet demeanor was a symptom of a broken, submissive spirit. They failed to realize that when a person stops speaking, they start observing. I watched how they spent money they didn't actually have. I noticed how my mother would aggressively berate retail workers to make herself feel powerful. I analyzed how my father manipulated his congregation's guilt to fund his private jets. I saw the fragile, pathetic reality behind their stained glass facade. They were drowning in debt, vanity, and moral bankruptcy. The only reason I survived that toxic ecosystem was by realizing that the greatest revenge I could ever exact was not to scream or throw tantrums but to outgrow them entirely. How I managed to build a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm right under their noses is a testament to the sheer power of being underestimated. When I was 19 years old, attending a state university on a full academic scholarship that my parents never once celebrated, I started day trading with the tiny stipend I had saved from working nights at a campus library. While Nia was gifted a brand new BMW for barely graduating high school, and Darius was handed a six-figure allowance to find himself in Europe, I was surviving on instant ramen and meticulously studying market algorithms. I didn't complain. The blatant neglect was actually a gift. It gave me the ultimate cloak of invisibility. By the time I was 25, my aggressive, highly calculated investments had snowballed into a massive personal fortune. That was the year I quietly founded Vanguard Holdings. However, I was not naive. I intimately understood the deep-seated prejudices of Atlanta's conservative old money financial sector. A young, brilliant, single African-American woman walking into those elite boardrooms would have faced endless, exhausting scrutiny. They would have questioned my credentials, aggressively audited my capital, and tried to box me out of the most lucrative real estate deals. I needed a Trojan horse. I needed a face that the established, arrogant white billionaires of this city would implicitly trust over a glass of expensive bourbon at their restricted country clubs. That was exactly when I found Harrison Sterling. Harrison was a seasoned, highly educated financial executive who had recently been forced into early retirement by a rival firm. He possessed the perfect aesthetic, silver hair, tailored bespoke suits, a booming baritone voice, and a pedigree from an Ivy League university. I approached him, proved my astronomical liquid capital, and offered him a staggeringly generous salary to serve as the chief operating officer and public face of Vanguard Holdings. He answered exclusively to me, executing my precise strategies and acquisitions, while the public and my family believed he was the supreme mastermind. It was a flawlessly executed symbiotic relationship. Harrison got to maintain his prestigious societal status, and I got to conquer the market from the shadows, entirely uninterrupted by the exhausting politics of high society. Whenever my parents forced me to attend their lavish church galas or tedious family dinners, I would sit quietly in the corner, wearing off-the-rack department store dresses, deliberately playing the role of the struggling administrative assistant. I listened to my father passionately preach about wealth being a divine reward. I listened to Connor loudly brag about his fragile tech startup to anyone who would listen. I listened, I smiled, and I internally categorized their every financial vulnerability. I knew exactly which banks Connor was desperately borrowing from. I knew precisely which shell accounts my father was using to hide his embezzled church funds. I knew everything because Vanguard Holdings secretly owned or financed a significant portion of the institutions they relied upon to maintain their fragile house of cards. They thought my silence was born of intimidation and failure. They never realized it was the deadly patience of an apex predator observing its oblivious prey. The tipping point occurred during our annual early holiday dinner at an impossibly expensive steakhouse in downtown Atlanta. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the white tablecloths, but the atmosphere at our table was freezing. My father was entirely ignoring the family standing up every 5 minutes to shake hands with local politicians and affluent donors dining nearby. My mother was busy whispering harshly to the waiters, demanding they refill her wine and complaining about the lighting. I sat quietly watching my 6 nieces and nephews throw pieces of bread at each other while their parents did absolutely nothing to intervene. Nia was busy taking selfies with Connor, making sure her diamond ring caught the light. Darius and Lauren were debating the merits of organic ski resorts. I was completely invisible to them until the waiter approached with the leather folio containing the check. The total was astronomical, $4,500. The waiter placed it near the center of the table. Connor did not even look at the receipt. He just smirked, reached out with one manicured hand, and slid the heavy leather folder directly across the table until it hit my water glass. "Tessa, you take care of this one," Connor said, his voice carrying that familiar mocking lilt. "My investment fund just locked up a massive amount of capital for a new development project, so our liquid cash is a bit tied up this week. Besides, consider this your contribution to the family. You are always eating at your parents' house anyway." The sheer audacity of his statement made my chest tighten. Before I could even process the insult, Lauren chimed in from across the table, swirling her martini glass. "He is right, Tessa. It is not like you have a mortgage in a gated community or private school tuition to pay for. A single woman with your simple lifestyle does not really have any real expenses. Just think of it as buying a nice treat for your nieces and nephews. You should be happy to make yourself useful." I looked around the table. My father was still schmoozing a city councilman near the bar. My mother caught my eye, her expression hardening into a glare. "Just put your card down, Tessa," she hissed under her breath. "Do not embarrass us in front of all these people. Connor is doing big things right now, and you need to support your brother-in-law. Pull your weight for once." My pulse pounded in my ears, but my face remained perfectly calm. I had spent my entire life swallowing their insults, shrinking myself to make them feel larger. I looked at Connor, who was grinning at Nia as if he had just delivered a brilliant punchline. I looked at Lauren, who was rolling her eyes at my hesitation. They truly believed I was nothing. They truly believed they held all the power. I did not argue. I did not cry. I opened my purse, reached inside, and pulled out my American Express Centurion card. The heavy anodized titanium black card caught the ambient light as I placed it silently into the leather folder and pushed it back toward the waiter. Connor glanced at the card, pausing for a fraction of a second. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, but his arrogance quickly smothered it. He let out a loud, barking laugh. "A black card, really, Tessa? Let me guess, you got one of those low-limit prepaid cards that just looks fancy to impress people at the grocery store. Do not embarrass yourself. Make sure that thing does not bounce, or I will have to step in and save you again." I did not bother to correct his ignorant assumption. Instead, I simply smiled, placed my linen napkin on the table, and pushed my chair back with slow, deliberate precision. I looked down at Connor, refusing to let my calm facade slip for even a fraction of a second. I told them I needed to use the restroom, my voice perfectly steady, despite the hurricane of betrayal raging inside my chest. Connor rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath about my inability to take a joke, while Nia immediately went back to scrolling through her phone. I turned on my heel and walked away from the table, my posture impeccably straight. The plush carpet of the steakhouse absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I navigated the winding, dimly lit corridor toward the luxury powder room. I desperately needed a moment to breathe, to collect myself, before returning to that deeply toxic environment. The air in the hallway felt incredibly heavy, thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and old money. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door of the restroom, grateful to find the elegant, bright marble space completely empty. I safely locked myself very securely inside it, before I could even process the absolute cruelty of my brother-in-law. The restroom door swung open again. I heard the sharp, unmistakable clicking of my sister Nia stepping onto the marble floor, followed closely by my mother Vivian. I held my breath, standing perfectly still inside the stall. I had no intention of eavesdropping, but their voices carried effortlessly in the echoing space. "I just do not understand why we have to bring her to these lunches," Nia complained, dropping her designer purse onto the vanity counter. "She is so depressing to look at. Connor hates making conversation with her." "We have to maintain appearances for the extended family," my mother replied smoothly, the sound of running water accompanying her words. You know how your father talks. If we exclude Tessa entirely, it makes us look bad. Besides, we absolutely need her for next week. Nia sighed loudly. Are you absolutely sure she's going to take the kids? Connor and I already booked our first-class tickets to Aspen. If we have to cancel because she refuses to babysit, Connor will be furious. You know exactly how much he hates dealing with 6 screaming, very messy kids. Do not worry about Tessa, my mother said dismissively. We are not even going to ask her. We are just going to drop all the grandchildren off at the family mansion on Friday morning and leave for the airport immediately. She will not have any choice but to watch them while we are gone. But what if she has plans? Nia asked, though she sounded entirely unconcerned about the possibility. My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed terribly against the expensive bathroom tiles. Plans, Nia, please be realistic. Your sister does not have a real life. She has no husband, no children, and no friends. She sits in her tiny apartment staring at a computer screen all day. She owes this family for constantly putting up with her awkwardness. Watching her own nieces and nephews for 2 weeks is the absolute least she can do to repay us for our kindness. I stood frozen in the bathroom stall, my fingernails digging so deeply into my palms that they drew blood. A chilling realization washed over me like freezing water. I was not a daughter to them. I was not a sister. I was merely a disposable tool. I listened to the sound of them touching up their lipstick, spraying their expensive perfumes, and finally walking out of the restroom, their heels clicking away into the distance. Once the heavy door swung completely shut, I stepped out of the stall and walked slowly over to the vanity mirror. I stared at my own reflection. For years, I had convinced myself that if I just remained compliant, if I just silently paid their massive bills and saved their sprawling estate from foreclosure, they would eventually learn to respect me. I had foolishly believed that my profound financial generosity would buy their elusive love. Instead, it had only purchased their bottomless entitlement and vicious cruelty. I washed my hands under the warm water, dried them carefully with a thick towel, and made a final firm decision. The megachurch they loved so much, the sprawling property they believed they rightfully owned, was legally registered entirely in my name. The credit card's funding, Connor and Nia's luxurious lifestyle were completely sustained by my private trust. I took a very deep breath, smoothed the front of my tailored jacket, and walked calmly back out into the bustling, brightly lit, very crowded upscale restaurant. When I returned to the table, my mother and sister were already seated sipping their expensive drinks and chatting animatedly with Connor about their upcoming trip. They did not even bother to look up when I pulled my chair out and sat down. The waiter arrived moments later carrying a silver tray with the finalized bill. My mother snatched it up, her eyes scanning the exorbitant total with absolute satisfaction, knowing she would never have to pay a single dime of it. She pulled out the platinum credit card from her designer wallet, the exact card I had authorized for her emergency use years ago, and casually tossed it onto the silver tray. Connor leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He looked at me with a smug, deeply arrogant expression that made my skin crawl. You know, Tessa, he drawled loudly, ensuring the neighboring tables could hear his profound wisdom. If you ever decide to stop hiding in your apartment and want a real job, my offer still stands. We always need someone to organize the files and answer the phone lines. It builds character. I smiled very warmly, looking him straight in the eyes. I appreciate the generous offer, Connor, but I am quite satisfied with my current position, I said, keeping my voice light and conversational. Filing papers and answering phones sounds a bit too fast-paced for me anyway. Connor chuckled, entirely missing the pure sarcasm laced into my words. He returned to his expensive bourbon, satisfied that he had put me in my place. I pulled my chair closer and smoothed the napkin over my lap, feeling a profound calm wash over me. The anger that spiked in the restroom was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Knowing their secret plan to abandon 6 children at my doorstep strangely liberated me from guilt. I no longer had to wonder if I was being too harsh or misinterpreting their intentions. They had laid their absolute lack of respect for me bare on those pristine bathroom tiles. I looked around the table, seeing my family not as the imposing figures of my childhood, but as predictable, highly shallow actors playing out a very tired script. My younger brother Darius was busy dissecting his perfectly cooked steak. He had always been the absolute most passive member of the family, content to ride the coattails of my parents' wealth until he married Lauren. Lauren was a woman who practically radiated inherited privilege. She wore a constant expression of mild distaste, as if the air around her was never quite pure enough. She noticed me looking directly in their direction and immediately seized the opportunity to join the verbal assault. "You really should take Connor up on his offer, Tessa," Lauren chimed in, adjusting the massive diamond ring on her left hand. "Darius and I were just discussing how stagnant your own career seems. It must be so incredibly draining to wake up every single day and commute to a job that offers zero upward mobility. At least working for Connor would give you some exposure to real wealth and success. You might actually learn how to present yourself properly in high society." Darius nodded in agreement, not even bothering to look up from his plate. "Lauren is right, Tessa. Mom was just saying the other day how worried she is about your lack of ambition. You are not getting any younger, and living alone in that tiny apartment cannot be good for your mental health. You need to start making better choices." I maintained my pleasant, unwavering smile. "My apartment is actually very comfortable, Darius, but I appreciate your sudden concern for my living arrangements." Lauren let out a sharp, condescending sigh. "Comfortable is just another word for settling, Tessa, but since you do not have any real responsibilities or a highly demanding career to worry about, you really need to make yourself useful during the holidays. Darius and I are absolutely exhausted from planning our winter getaway. We need you to step up and handle the heavy lifting for the family Christmas gathering. It is the absolute least you can do, considering you have virtually zero social obligations." "Make myself useful?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, as if I were genuinely considering her brilliant advice. "How exactly would you suggest I do that, Lauren?" "By being available," she stated firmly, waving her fork in the air. "We all have incredibly demanding lives. Connor and Nia are exhausted. Darius and I are exhausted. Your parents are exhausted from running the church. You are the only one with nothing going on. So when we need things done, we expect you to be there without any verbal complaints. It is called being a supportive sister." I knew exactly what she was building toward. She was laying the groundwork for the impending child dumping scheme my mother had orchestrated earlier in the restroom. They were systematically setting the trap, assuming I was too docile and desperate for their approval to ever see it coming. "I understand completely," I said, keeping my tone perfectly submissive. "Family is very important to me. I will make sure I am exactly where I need to be this Christmas." Lauren smiled triumphantly, looking over at Nia as if she had just successfully trained a disobedient dog. Nia offered a subtle nod of approval. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they failed to notice my hand slipping discreetly beneath the heavy tablecloth. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and unlocked the screen using my fingerprint. While my family continued to boast about their upcoming luxury ski trip to Aspen, I opened my secure messaging application and selected the contact for Marcus, my personal executive assistant. Marcus was a man who handled the logistics of my multi-billion-dollar empire with ruthless efficiency. I kept my phone concealed under the table, my fingers moving rapidly across the digital keyboard. I did not need to look at the screen to type out all my exact demands. "Marcus," I typed, "I require an immediate booking for a private luxury villa in St. Bart's. The reservation must begin on December 23rd and last for 10 days. I want the most exclusive property available on the island, completely secluded from the public. Secure a private chef, a dedicated domestic staff, and full access to a private yacht. Money is absolutely no object. Confirm the booking as soon as possible and arrange for my own private jet to be fueled and ready for departure." I hit send and seamlessly slipped the phone back into my tailored pocket. I brought my hands back up to the table, resting them gently beside my crystal water glass. My heart beat with a steady, exhilarating rhythm. The trap they were setting for me was about to snap shut entirely on their own fingers. I looked around the table at the people who shared my blood but possessed none of my loyalty. They thought they were the masters of this elaborate game, completely unaware that I had just changed the rules, bought the board, and rigged the outcome. The dessert plates were cleared, leaving remnants of cheesecake scattered across the linen. My father, Pastor James, deliberately cleared his throat. He picked up his goblet and tapped his silver spoon against the rim. The ringing sound commanded immediate attention. He stood slowly smoothing his tailored suit jacket, his chest puffed out with paternal arrogance. He looked around the table, his eyes lingering on Nia, Connor, Darius, and Lauren, before settling a cold gaze directly on me. I kept my posture relaxed, resting my hands in my lap, waiting for the inevitable sermon that accompanied our gatherings. Before we conclude this evening, I want to reflect on the true meaning of the upcoming holiday season. My father began, his voice dropping into that resonant cadence he used to captivate parishioners every Sunday. Christmas is not merely about lavish gifts or expensive trips. It is fundamentally about the spirit of profound sacrifice. It is about understanding your rightful place within the family unit and doing whatever is necessary to support those building our legacy. He paused dramatically, ensuring his words carried the full weight of his underlying threat. The Lord rewards those who serve without complaint. We all have our specific roles to play. Connor and Nia are expanding their business empires. Darius and Lauren are cultivating important social connections. They carry the heavy burden of leadership, and then there are those who must provide quiet, essential support from the background. His eyes locked onto mine, narrowing slightly to ensure I understood the direct implication of his speech. Sacrifice means setting aside your insignificant desires for the greater good of the family's success. It means stepping up when called upon without hesitation and without demanding any recognition. A family can only thrive when every member pulls their weight. I expect absolute devotion from everyone sitting at this table. Let us remember that serving your family is the highest duty. He raised his glass, and the rest of the table followed suit. To family and to knowing your place, he concluded smoothly. To family, Connor echoed loudly, clinking his glass against Nia's with a triumphant smirk. I raised my own water glass, offering a polite, unwavering smile. To knowing exactly where we all stand, I replied softly. My mother Vivian gave me an approving nod, mistaking my calm compliance for total submission. She believed her manipulative restroom strategy had worked perfectly, assuming I had already accepted my fate as the unpaid childcare provider for their vacation. With the sermon concluded, the conversation shifted back to their favorite topic themselves. Nia leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. I cannot wait to hit the slopes in Aspen. Connor booked us the most incredible ski chalet at the base of the mountain. They have a private sommelier and a heated infinity pool. It is going to be the perfect escape from the miserable Atlanta winter. Lauren chimed in, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Darius and I already ordered our new ski suits. We have reservations at that exclusive mountaintop restaurant that requires a 6-month waiting list. It is going to be exhausting dealing with the altitude, but we desperately need the break. Taking care of the children has been draining lately. I do not know how normal people survive without nannies. It will be nice to completely detach from all responsibilities for a week. Darius laughed, wrapping an arm around his wife. We deserve it. We have been working hard to maintain our lifestyle. The kids will be perfectly fine staying back here. They need to learn how to entertain themselves anyway, and a quiet week at home will be good for their discipline. Connor looked across the table at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. You should ask for pictures, Tessa. We will post updates on social media so you can live vicariously through us. Maybe if you save up your salary for a few years, you could afford a trip to a motel. Until then, enjoy the peace and quiet of staying home and keeping the house secure for us. That sounds lovely, Connor. I answered, my tone perfectly even. I am sure your trip will be incredibly memorable. You all certainly deserve exactly what is coming to you. My mother began gathering her designer coat, signaling that the evening was ending. Well, this has been a productive dinner. Tessa, do not forget to validate your parking on the way out. We will be dropping the children off at the main house early on Friday morning. Make sure you are punctual and ready to help. I will be exactly where I need to be, Mother, I assured her, standing up from my chair and smoothing my skirt down. As they began exchanging their loud, performative goodbyes, my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I stepped away from the group, turning my back to them as I retrieved the device. The screen illuminated with a secure, encrypted message from my executive assistant, Marcus. I opened the text, scanning the brief, highly efficient confirmation. Madam Chairman, your instructions have been fully executed. The exclusive beachfront villa in St. Bart's has been secured under the corporate holding name for 10 days, beginning December 23rd. The domestic staff, private chef, and yacht crew are fully briefed and awaiting your arrival. Your private jet has been fueled, cleared by air traffic control, and is scheduled for a discreet departure from the private terminal on Friday evening. All flight plans are strictly confidential, awaiting your final command. A profound, icy thrill shot through my veins. The trap was now fully operational, and my family was sprinting directly into it with blinding arrogance. I locked my phone, slipping it back into my pocket, and turned around to face my family one last time before the holidays. They were laughing, boasting, and reveling in their perceived superiority, completely oblivious to the massive storm gathering directly over their heads. The quiet retaliation had officially begun. But booking a 10-day vacation to St. Bart's was only the first superficial layer of my strategy. Escaping their immediate physical presence was necessary for my peace of mind, but it was not enough to dismantle their arrogance. If I simply abandoned them, they would eventually find another babysitter, spin a narrative to their friends about my mental instability, and continue living their fraudulent lives. I needed to fundamentally break the very foundation of their superiority, their finances. The morning after the disastrous steakhouse dinner, I did not go to my modest one-bedroom decoy apartment. Instead, my driver took me directly to a highly secure private underground parking facility in the financial district. I took the private elevator up to a stunning multi-million-dollar penthouse that I actually owned under a corporate shell company. The space was a fortress of minimalist luxury and cutting-edge technology. Marcus was already waiting for me in the expansive home office, an espresso prepared exactly to my liking, resting on the glass desk. The wall-to-wall digital monitors were illuminated with a labyrinth of complex financial data. "Good morning, Madam Chairman," Marcus said smoothly. "The St. Bart's logistics are finalized. Now, regarding the secondary directives you encrypted last night." I sat in my leather chair, taking a sip of the espresso. "Show me Connor's liquidity." Marcus tapped his tablet, and the center monitor instantly pulled up the deeply classified financial history of Novatech. It was a bloodbath of red numbers. "Connor Prescott is effectively insolvent," Marcus reported with clinical precision. "He has maxed out 3 separate corporate lines of credit. His burn rate is catastrophic. The only thing keeping him afloat is the illusion of his upcoming Series B funding, which he foolishly assumes Vanguard Holdings will approve." "And his personal accounts?" I asked, examining the data. "Heavily leveraged," Marcus replied. "His primary platinum credit cards are issued through a subsidiary bank that Vanguard acquired last fiscal quarter. He currently has $90,000 in outstanding travel expenses, most of which is the non-refundable first-class tickets and luxury chalet bookings for their Aspen trip." A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Connor had sat at that restaurant and loudly mocked my supposed low-limit prepaid card, entirely oblivious to the fact that my corporation literally owned the debt on the very platinum card in his wallet. He was using my money to fund the vacation he expected me to facilitate for free. "Marcus," I said softly, the silence of the penthouse amplifying my command, "I want you to flag Connor's platinum accounts for suspected institutional fraud. Specifically cite the irregularities in his corporate filings. Trigger an immediate hard freeze on every single line of credit attached to his social security number. I don't want a single penny accessible." Marcus didn't even blink. "Understood. When should the freeze take effect?" "Time it perfectly," I instructed. "Set the algorithmic lock to engage precisely at 12 o'clock on Christmas Eve. I want him standing at the airline check-in counter, surrounded by wealthy travelers, when the system brutally declines his card for his excess ski baggage fees. I want the airline staff to publicly inform him that his accounts have been terminated." "It will be a spectacular scene," Marcus noted, typing the commands into the secure terminal. "And what about Pastor James?" I shifted my gaze to the right monitor, which displayed the auditing records of my father's megachurch. The $5 million expansion loan was sitting right there, bleeding out into luxury car leases and designer clothes. Let my father stew in his ignorance for a few more days. I decided, resting my chin on my entwined fingers. We will let them miss their flight panic over the children and experience the sheer terror of Connor's sudden poverty. Then when they are at their absolute weakest, we will deliver the fatal blow to the church. Prepare the default notices, Marcus. Ensure the legal team is ready to strike the moment I give the signal from the island. Everything is primed, Tessa, Marcus said, closing his tablet. They are walking onto a battlefield entirely blindfolded. They blindfolded themselves, I corrected him calmly. I am simply refusing to guide them out of the minefield. I stood up, smoothing my tailored slacks, entirely prepared to put on my mask of the compliant, struggling daughter one final time. It was time to go collect the absurd babysitting itinerary. The wrought iron gates of my parents' estate swung open 2 days before Christmas, revealing a sprawling brick mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. I parked my modest sedan between Connor's luxury SUV and my father's imported sedan. The contrast was intentional, a visual camouflage I maintained for years to keep them blissfully ignorant of my actual net worth. I walked up the limestone steps to the massive double doors. Before I touched the polished handle, Lauren yanked the door open. Dressed in designer athletic wear, she held a thick stack of papers, looking wildly exasperated. "You are exactly 4 minutes late, Tessa," Lauren snapped, tapping her manicured fingernail against the top page of the stack. "I explicitly told your mother we needed to review the children's schedules before my massage appointment. Time is incredibly precious today." "Good morning to you, Lauren," I said pleasantly, stepping into the foyer. Maids rushed around carrying dry-cleaned gala gowns and heavy winter coats. In the living room, my 3 nephews and 3 nieces were destroying an expensive gingerbread house my mother had commissioned. Lauren shoved the heavy stack of papers against my chest, forcing me to grab it or let it fall. "This is the master itinerary for the next 10 days, she commanded, her voice echoing in the hallway. It is color-coded by child. The pink sections cover Sophia and Harper's strict dietary needs. They are currently on a specialized gluten-free raw vegan cleanse to improve their focus. You cannot under any circumstances feed them processed sugar. I arranged for a grocer to deliver their imported alkaline water tomorrow morning. You need to be awake by 5 to receive it." I looked down at the absurdly detailed 3-page document. She practically scheduled their bathroom breaks. "A raw vegan cleanse for a 7-year-old?" I asked, allowing just a fraction of curiosity to show. "Do not question my parenting methods," Lauren scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You do not have any children, so you simply cannot comprehend the immense stress of raising high-performing kids. Just read the list and follow it exactly." The blue sections outline the boys' mandatory piano and fencing practice schedules. You will need to drive them to their private tutors across town every afternoon. Connor left the keys to the backup minivan on the kitchen counter for you to use. Right on cue. Connor strolled into the foyer holding a steaming mug of expensive espresso. He looked me up and down, wearing that signature look of patronizing amusement. "I hope you are ready to actually work for a living, Tessa." He chuckled, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Lauren spent 3 hours typing up those instructions. I left the minivan out back. "Make absolutely sure you do not let the kids eat anything messy inside it. I just had the interior detailed last month, and I do not want your carelessness ruining the upholstery. Oh, and you need to pay for the gas yourself while we are gone. Consider it your rent for staying in this beautiful house." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They were leaving 6 highly energetic, undisciplined children with me for over a week entirely for free and demanding I pay for the fuel required to chauffeur them to their elite extracurricular activities. They did not ask if I had to work. They did not ask if I had plans with friends. They operated on the deeply ingrained assumption that my time was completely worthless and inherently belonged to them. "I will make sure the gas tank is full," I replied smoothly, folding the ridiculous itinerary and slipping it into my bag. "You two just focus on having a relaxing time in Aspen. I know how stressful your lives must be." Connor grinned, puffing out his chest. "Exactly. It is a high-pressure world out there, Tessa. Someday, if you ever manage to get a real job, you might understand the pressure we deal with daily. Until then, just keep the kids alive and do not break anything expensive in the house." My mother emerged from the dining room holding a clipboard and looking incredibly frantic. Lauren, your massage therapist is waiting in the East Wing. Connor, your ski equipment is finally packed. Tessa, what are you just standing around for? Go to the kitchen and start preparing the organic kale snacks for the children. Nia and I need absolute silence in the West Wing while we finalize our outfits for the governor's gala tonight. Do not let any of the children come near my fitting room. Of course, Mother, I said dutifully. I will head to the kitchen right now. And Tessa, my mother added sharply, pausing at the bottom of the grand staircase. Do not invite any of your strange little friends over while we are gone. This is a respectable neighborhood. We do not need you turning our house into a hangout spot for low-income office workers. Just focus entirely on the children. You owe us a flawless holiday. I promise you, Mother, this holiday will be entirely flawless, I answered, my voice steady and sweet. As they scattered to their various luxury appointments and stressful fitting sessions, I walked quietly toward the massive chef's kitchen. I tossed Lauren's color-coded 3-page dictatorial itinerary straight into the stainless steel trash can. I did not need to memorize the dietary restrictions of a 7-year-old vegan, nor did I need to map out the route to the fencing academy. I was not going to be here. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a message from my private aviation team. The jet was prepped, and the crew was fully briefed for our discreet evening departure to the Caribbean. I smiled, listening to the deafening chaos of 6 children screaming in the living room, knowing well that tomorrow this nightmare would be entirely theirs to manage. The screaming from the living room reached a fever pitch, the sound of shattering glass followed by a chorus of childish wails. I stood in the immaculate chef's kitchen, leaning against the cold marble island, and simply took a slow sip of my water. I did not rush out to investigate the damage. I had promised to treat those children exactly as my family treated me, which meant offering them absolute unwavering neglect. My mother's voice shrieked from the grand staircase, demanding to know what had broken, but she did not bother coming down to check. She simply yelled my name, expecting me to handle the mess, while she continued her extensive beauty regimen for the prestigious governor's gala tonight. I simply smiled to myself in the silence. I walked into the living room to find the massive custom-built gingerbread house completely decimated across the Persian rug. The youngest twins were smearing royal icing into the expensive upholstery of my mother's vintage velvet sofa, completely violating their strict vegan cleanse. I offered them a bright smile, stepped over a broken candy cane, and quietly made my way down the hall toward the back guest room. The afternoon faded into a tense, frantic evening. The entire mansion buzzed with the chaotic energy of arrogant, superficial people preparing to be seen by other arrogant people. High-priced makeup artists scurried up the winding staircase. Connor was loudly complaining about his tailored tuxedo feeling too tight, blaming the dry cleaner. Lauren was practically in tears because her diamond necklace lacked the specific sparkle she required. None of them spared a single worried glance toward the den, where their 6 children were engaged in a violent, high-decibel turf war, using expensive holiday ornaments as heavy projectiles. It was a beautiful, chaotic disaster. Tessa, my father bellowed from the hallway, adjusting his silk bow tie. We are departing for the gala in exactly 40 minutes. Make absolutely sure the children are bathed, fed, and completely silent before we leave. We cannot have them ruining our focus before such a critical networking event. Consider it done, Father, I called back, my voice perfectly sweet and entirely hollow. I retreated to the dimly lit guest bedroom they had graciously allowed me to use, located far away from the luxurious master suites. I opened the small closet and pulled out my single piece of luggage, a sleek black leather designer carry-on. I had packed it 3 days ago. It contained everything I needed for the tropical climate of the Caribbean. I changed out of my plain, understated sweater and slipped into a tailored, lightweight linen suit. I checked my reflection in the mirror on the door. The compliant, invisible sister was gone forever. The ruthless, highly successful executive had finally arrived. I grabbed my suitcase, passport, and black card. I walked silently down the back service hallway, bypassing the grand foyer entirely. The sounds of my family bickering over taking the perfect group photo echoed through the massive house. They were completely absorbed in their own vanity. I pushed open the heavy oak service door and stepped out into the freezing, bitter Atlanta air. A sleek armored SUV was idling quietly in the cobblestone driveway near the delivery entrance. The professional driver immediately stepped out and opened the rear door. I slid into the heated leather seat, letting out a long, deeply satisfying breath of freedom. "To the private aviation terminal, please," I instructed softly. The driver nodded seamlessly, pulling the heavy vehicle out of the estate. I did not look back at them at all. The drive to the airport was blissfully smooth. We bypassed the crowded commercial terminals entirely, pulling directly up to the quiet private hangar. Marcus, my executive assistant, had orchestrated everything with his usual flawless precision. A streamlined Gulfstream jet sat gleaming on the tarmac. The flight crew welcomed me aboard with warm smiles, addressing me by my proper corporate title. I sank into the plush leather seat, accepting a crystal flute of vintage champagne. As the jet smoothly ascended into the dark winter sky, I looked out the window at the glittering city of Atlanta, shrinking rapidly beneath me. Down there in a massive brick mansion, 6 untamed children were systematically destroying thousands of dollars worth of luxury furniture. Down there, 6 arrogant adults were posing for cameras, entirely oblivious to the absolute ticking time bomb waiting for them. The flight to the Caribbean was a masterclass in absolute tranquility. I reviewed a few financial portfolios, finalized the acquisition of a rival firm, and slept soundly for 3 hours. When the jet touched down in St. Bart's, the freezing winter air was instantly replaced by the warm, intoxicating breeze of the tropics. A private helicopter transferred me directly from the airstrip to the secluded, ultra-exclusive beachfront villa I had secured. The property was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooked the crashing, vivid turquoise waves of the ocean. A private gourmet chef had already prepared a massive spread of fresh grilled seafood and tropical fruits. I walked out onto the expansive wooden terrace, the warm mahogany wood feeling wonderful beneath my bare feet. The moonlight danced beautifully across the surface of my private infinity pool. It was absolute, undeniable perfection in every single way, exactly what I deserved. I sat down on a luxurious lounge chair, pulling my smartphone from my jacket pocket. I checked the time. It was currently 9 o'clock in the evening back in Atlanta. The governor's gala would be reaching its peak, and my family would be returning to the mansion very soon to prepare for their early morning flight to Aspen. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, a slow, deeply victorious smile spreading across my face. I slowly opened my settings and turned the device entirely to silent mode. The quiet retaliation was officially over. The spectacular explosive fallout was about to finally begin. As the warm Caribbean breeze drifted across the glowing infinity pool, my mind wandered back to the magnificent sequence of events that had safely delivered me to this tropical paradise. I closed my eyes, savoring the absolute brilliance of my quiet escape. The sheer, overwhelming absurdity of my family's behavior earlier that day played like a dark comedy in my mind. I retraced every single step, relishing the profound contrast between their toxic chaos and my current undeniable tranquility. While they were busy obsessing over their artificial social status, I was silently securing my ultimate freedom. I remembered the exact moment I decided to leave them to their own spectacular ruin. The sprawling brick mansion in Atlanta had been an absolute hurricane of entitlement and vanity. December 23rd was always a high-stakes performance for my parents, culminating in the prestigious Governor's Gala. The west wing of the estate had transformed into a frantic battleground of designer gowns, aggressive tuxedo fittings, and misplaced priorities. My mother Vivian had been screaming frantic orders from the top of the grand sweeping staircase. She was viciously berating a hired tailor because the delicate hand-beaded hem of her custom evening gown was allegedly sitting a fraction of an inch too high. Nia was actively hyperventilating in the hallway over a missing diamond earring, completely ignoring her youngest toddler, who was currently using a permanent black marker to draw on the antique silk wallpaper. Connor was aggressively shouting at a customer service representative on his cell phone, demanding a last-minute upgrade to a private luxury suite for their upcoming Aspen flight. Darius and Lauren were engaged in a loud, incredibly shallow debate over which luxury platinum watch paired better with an organic silk pocket square. Their collective narcissism was deafening, while that massive circus of vanity raged fiercely throughout the main corridors. I had remained hidden inside the small, cramped guest bedroom they had so graciously assigned to me. I had ignored the heavy stack of color-coded vegan dietary instructions Lauren had aggressively shoved against my chest. Instead, I carefully packed my single sleek designer carry-on bag. I meticulously folded my lightweight linen suits, my expensive silk evening wear, and my exclusive beach attire. I made sure to leave the absurd 3-page babysitting itinerary sitting right in the center of the cheap wooden bedside table. My mother's shrill voice had echoed forcefully down the long corridor, piercing the thick walls of my temporary prison. "Tessa, bring my heated slippers up here immediately, and make absolutely sure you lock the nursery doors so the kids do not ruin my entrance." I did not answer her arrogant demand. I did not utter a single word of protest. I simply zipped my leather bag shut, smoothed the front of my tailored jacket, and walked silently out the back service door. The freezing winter air hit my face, but I only felt immense warmth. The sleek black chauffeured car was waiting exactly where Marcus had arranged it, idling quietly near the delivery entrance. Slipping away from their oppressive grip was the most liberating action I had ever taken. Now sitting thousands of miles away in St. Bart's, I took another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my vintage champagne. My private chef, a renowned culinary expert from Paris, walked out onto the expansive wooden terrace bearing a heavy silver tray loaded with miniature lobster tarts and premium caviar. "Is everything to your liking, Madam Chairman?" he asked respectfully, bowing his head. "It is absolutely perfect, Henri," I replied, offering him a genuine, relaxed smile. I spent the remainder of the evening floating in the heated infinity pool, watching the brilliant stars illuminate the clear Caribbean sky. I slept incredibly soundly that night, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets, completely undisturbed by the screaming tantrums of neglected children or the aggressive demands of ungrateful adults. I woke up the next morning, December 24th, feeling remarkably refreshed and entirely reborn. The bright tropical sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my secluded master suite. I stepped out onto the private balcony, breathing in the crisp, salty ocean air. Today was the day the grand illusion would finally shatter. Today was Christmas Eve, the exact day my siblings were scheduled to board their luxurious flight to Aspen, fully expecting me to manage their chaotic offspring for free. I enjoyed a private guided yoga session on the sun-drenched deck, followed by a deep tissue massage that melted away years of accumulated family tension. I spent the early afternoon lounging on the deck of my private yacht, sipping freshly squeezed tropical juice, while the dedicated crew navigated the pristine, sparkling turquoise waters. Every moment of luxury was a direct rebellion against the miserable, compliant life my family had tried to force upon me. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I returned to the spectacular beachfront villa. I sat down at the heavy mahogany dining table, opening my secure corporate laptop to quickly review a few highly classified financial portfolios. I approved a massive merger, authorized a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition, and transferred a significant bonus to Marcus for his flawless logistical planning. I was an absolute titan in the corporate world, yet my own flesh and blood truly believed I was nothing more than an incompetent, unpaid servant. Just to fully underscore the sheer absurdity of my family's delusions, I spent the late afternoon of Christmas Eve demonstrating exactly what my incompetence looked like on a global scale. I moved from the dining table to the expansive shaded cabana overlooking the ocean to take a highly classified encrypted video conference call. On the massive digital screen in front of me were 5 of the most powerful corporate leaders in Tokyo. They were the key stakeholders in a multinational logistics acquisition I had been ruthlessly negotiating for the past 6 months. I sat back in my plush chair wearing a simple white linen sundress and oversized designer sunglasses, my bare feet resting on the warm teakwood deck. Harrison was on the call as well, dialing in from his luxurious home office in Atlanta, acting as my highly paid intermediary. For 2 hours, I orchestrated a complex, high-stakes financial ballet. When the Japanese executives attempted to lowball the final valuation by $10 million, I didn't raise my voice. I simply leaned forward, unmuted my microphone, and delivered a precise surgical breakdown of their own internal supply chain weaknesses, projecting their profit losses over the next decade if they failed to partner with Vanguard. The translation delay lasted barely 3 seconds before the lead executive offered a deep, respectful nod of concession. The $300 million deal was officially sealed, fundamentally shifting the balance of international trade in our favor. I closed the laptop with a soft, satisfying click. Marcus immediately messaged me to confirm the wire transfers were locked in escrow. In the span of a single afternoon, while lounging beside a private Caribbean beach, I had expanded my empire by hundreds of millions. And yet, back in the freezing, bitter air of Georgia, my sister Nia was undoubtedly hyperventilating because there was no one to cut the crusts off her 7-year-old's vegan sandwiches. The juxtaposition was so incredibly stark, so profoundly comical that I couldn't help but let out a soft laugh that carried away on the tropical wind. Henri, my private chef, seamlessly replaced my empty sparkling water with a fresh glass of chilled rare vintage wine. I thanked him quietly, turning my attention completely away from the global markets and focusing entirely on the intimate, highly localized destruction that was about to unfold. I had deliberately orchestrated this exact timeline. I knew the precise hour my mother's gala would end. I knew the exact moment the exhausted, arrogant adults would pull into the driveway of the estate, fully expecting to seamlessly transition into their luxurious Aspen vacation. I wanted them to feel the absolute zenith of their misplaced confidence, right before the floor completely vanished beneath their feet. I glanced at the sleek diamond-encrusted watch on my wrist. The time was rapidly approaching. My family's carefully constructed world was currently balancing on the edge of a massive razor-sharp cliff. They were likely returning to the estate right now, fully expecting to grab their heavy ski luggage and leave for the airport, assuming I was diligently managing their chaotic household. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my silenced smartphone, and stared at the dark screen, waiting patiently for the ultimate explosive conflict to erupt, knowing perfectly well that they had deliberately brought this devastating catastrophe entirely upon their own heads. The warm mahogany decking beneath my feet felt like a solid foundation of freedom. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, leaving the screen dark and completely silent. The tropical breeze carried the sweet scent of jasmine and salt water, washing away the lingering memories of that sterile, oppressive brick mansion in Atlanta. I walked slowly along the edge of the infinity pool, letting my fingertips glide through the crystal-clear water. For the first time in my entire life, I was not rushing to meet an impossible expectation. I was not shrinking myself to fit into a mold designed by people who inherently despised me. I was simply breathing, existing in a space that I had earned through my own ruthless dedication and flawless execution. My private chef, Henri, appeared on the terrace holding a silver tray. He poured a generous measure of vintage champagne into a fresh crystal flute. He asked if I preferred my dinner served on the upper balcony or down by the private beach. I told him the balcony would be absolutely perfect. The level of respect he offered was a sharp, stunning contrast to the way my sister Nia and my sister-in-law Lauren spoke to me just 24 hours earlier. They treated me like an unpaid servant, barking orders and handing me color-coded dietary schedules, as if my sole purpose on this earth was to facilitate their fabricated luxury. Now they were about to experience exactly what it meant to live without my silent, invisible support. I sat down on a plush white lounge chair and calculated the current timeline unfolding back in Georgia. It was a mathematical certainty of absolute disaster. It was currently late evening. My mother, father, Nia, Connor, Darius, and Lauren had undoubtedly attended the highly exclusive Governor's Gala, spending the past few hours smiling for photographers and shaking hands with influential politicians. They were currently making their grand exit, likely climbing into their chauffeured vehicles, feeling entirely satisfied with their own perceived importance. In their arrogant minds, they believed they were heading back to a perfectly organized home. They fully expected to find their 6 chaotic children, bathed, fed, and sleeping soundly in their respective beds. They assumed my luggage would be hidden away in a closet, and I would be waiting by the front door to assist them with their heavy ski equipment for their early morning flight to Aspen. They were walking blindly into a catastrophe of their own making. I smiled, taking a slow sip of the crisp champagne. The reality waiting for them at the estate was beautifully destructive. The 6 children, ranging from toddlers to 7-year-olds, had been left entirely unsupervised for hours. There were no organic kale snacks prepared. There were no fencing lessons attended. There was no authoritative adult present to stop them from tearing through the expensive, antique-filled rooms of that massive house. I imagined the exact moment my mother would turn her golden key in the heavy oak front door. She would step into the marble foyer expecting absolute silence. Instead, she would be greeted by the deafening sound of unsupervised children running wild. The sheer panic would set in almost immediately. Lauren would scream about her strict vegan dietary schedule being ignored. Connor would aggressively search the driveway, realizing the beat-up minivan he had so graciously allowed me to use was completely untouched. Nia would start frantically shouting my name down the empty corridors, expecting me to emerge from the shadows with an apology and an explanation. But the house would offer them nothing but echoing silence and mounting chaos. They would rush to the small guest bedroom in the back hallway, throwing open the door to find it completely empty. The only thing waiting for them would be the ridiculous 3-page itinerary they had forced upon me, sitting untouched on the nightstand. I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out at the dark, vast ocean. The stars were beginning to appear bright and piercing against the black sky. I felt a profound sense of peace settling deep into my bones. This was not just a vacation. This was a permanent resignation from the role of the family scapegoat. I had spent over 3 decades believing that if I just worked a little harder, sacrificed a little more, and remained perfectly compliant, my parents would finally acknowledge my worth. I had secretly funded their lavish lifestyle through anonymous trusts, hoping my unseen generosity would somehow translate into genuine love. But love cannot be purchased from people who are morally bankrupt. They did not want a successful daughter. They wanted a convenient disposable tool. I walked back into the luxurious air-conditioned living room of the villa. The domestic staff had already turned down my bed, placing a small orchid on the plush pillows. I picked up my phone from the marble counter. The device was still entirely silent, but the screen was dark, hiding the inevitable explosion of notifications. I knew they were panicking. Their entire Aspen trip was heavily dependent on my free labor. Without me, they had no one to watch the children. They could not simply pack 6 screaming kids onto a luxury ski trip at the absolute last minute. They could not leave them alone. Their highly anticipated status-defining vacation was officially ruined, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. I walked into the massive spa-inspired bathroom and turned on the rainfall shower. The warm water cascaded over my shoulders, washing away the last remaining traces of Atlanta. I used the expensive, fragrant soaps provided by the villa, taking my time to enjoy the simple luxury of existing without obligation. When I finally stepped out and wrapped myself in a thick, monogrammed robe, I felt entirely renewed. I poured myself one last glass of sparkling water and walked back out to the terrace. The night was deeply quiet, filled only with the rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves against the pristine shore. I sat down on the comfortable outdoor sofa and finally reached for my phone. It was time to witness the glorious, unmitigated destruction. I pressed the power button, bringing the dark screen to life. I slowly disabled the silent mode and turned on the volume. The device instantly froze, completely overwhelmed by the massive influx of data rushing through the cellular network. I watched the screen with a calm, unwavering gaze as the numbers began to rapidly climb. It was a beautiful symphony of pure desperation, and I was ready to listen to every single note. But before I answered their incoming calls, I wanted a visual confirmation of my masterpiece. I swiped a secondary application on my phone, a highly encrypted surveillance program Marcus had discreetly installed. Because my private trust actually owned the sprawling brick mansion my parents lived in, I had full, unrestricted administrative access to the property's state-of-the-art security system. I tapped the screen and opened the live high-definition feeds from the estate's interior cameras. The visual that materialized on my screen was nothing short of glorious. The immaculate, aggressively curated foyer of the West Wing looked as though it had been struck by a localized hurricane. The antique Persian rug, which my mother often bragged was imported directly from Istanbul, was heavily smeared with something that looked suspiciously like crushed blueberries and organic mud. The remains of the shattered gingerbread house were scattered across the marble floor like shrapnel. In the center of the living room, my 7-year-old nieces, who were supposed to be enduring a strict gluten-free vegan cleanse, were sitting amidst a pile of torn wrapping paper, aggressively consuming a massive box of processed chocolate truffles they had clearly unearthed from my mother's hidden pantry. I watched the timestamp on the camera tick forward. Suddenly, the heavy oak front doors swung open. My parents, Nia, Connor, Darius, and Lauren, stepped into the foyer returning from the governor's gala. They were practically glowing with manufactured importance. My mother was draped in a massive fur coat, and my father was adjusting his silk bow tie with a smug expression. Connor was already pulling out his phone, loudly barking at someone about the early morning flight to Aspen. And then they stopped. The entire group froze collectively as their eyes adjusted to the absolute devastation of their pristine home. The audio feed kicked in, delivering their raw, unfiltered panic directly to my earpiece. My mother let out a shrill, breathless shriek that could have shattered glass. She dropped her designer clutch, her hands flying to her face as she surveyed the ruined rug and the smashed antiques. "Tessa!" My father bellowed, his booming, pastoral voice echoing uselessly through the massive, empty corridors. "Tessa, get down here immediately. What is the meaning of this disaster?" Lauren rushed forward, her gala gown dragging through the chocolate and mud, completely ignoring the property damage as she zeroed in on her daughters. "Sophia Harper, what are you eating? That is refined sugar. Spit it out right now, Tessa. You incompetent fool, where are you?" Connor stormed past them, his face flushed with furious crimson. I watched him march directly down the hallway toward the back guest bedroom where they had exiled me. The camera in the hallway captured him aggressively twisting the doorknob and throwing the door open. He stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, staring at the empty, neatly made bed and the completely barren closet. Slowly, he walked over to the nightstand, picking up the ridiculous, 3-page color-coded babysitting itinerary that Lauren had shoved into my chest earlier that morning. It was untouched. Connor practically sprinted back to the foyer, waving the itinerary in his manicured hand. "She is not here!" he shouted, his voice cracking with genuine, unadulterated terror. "Her luggage is gone. Her car is not in the driveway. She completely abandoned the house." "What do you mean she abandoned the house?" Nia screamed, aggressively shoving past him. "Our flight to Aspen leaves in 5 hours. We cannot take these little monsters with us. We have first-class tickets. Who is going to watch them?" The absolute chaos that ensued was a beautiful ballet of narcissistic collapse. Darius was frantically pacing in circles, pulling at his hair. Lauren was weeping over her ruined ski trip. My mother was hyperventilating, realizing that her perfect holiday illusion was entirely shattered. They had built a massive, precarious tower of luxury entirely on the assumption that my spine would serve as the foundation. Now that I had simply stepped out of the way, the entire structure was violently collapsing right on top of them. I watched Connor violently punch the drywall out of sheer frustration, instantly regretting it as he clutched his bruised knuckles. My father, completely losing his holy composure, began kicking the scattered gingerbread pieces across the room, unleashing a string of curses that would have gotten him excommunicated from his own megachurch. I smiled, taking a long, deeply satisfying sip of my champagne. I watched them scramble like panicked insects under a magnifying glass for a few more minutes, savoring their utter powerlessness. Only when Nia frantically pulled out her cell phone and dialed my number did I finally minimize the camera application. The screen flashed with her incoming call. I waited for the third ring, letting her anxiety peak before I casually pressed the green button. "I am currently sitting on the private terrace of a beachfront villa in St. Bart's." I stated, my voice as smooth and unbothered as the glass of vintage champagne resting in my hand. "The weather is absolutely breathtaking tonight. The ocean breeze is incredibly refreshing." I highly recommend taking a tropical vacation if you ever find the time. The line went completely dead for 5 agonizingly long seconds. I could hear the sharp, ragged intake of my mother's breath over the cellular connection. The sheer magnitude of my statement had successfully short-circuited her brain. Vivian, a woman who always had a sharp, cutting remark ready for any occasion, was entirely paralyzed by shock. She could not process the fact that the obedient, invisible daughter had defied her direct orders. In the background, the chaotic symphony of my family's ruin continued to play. A heavy vase shattered loudly against the hardwood floor, followed by the high-pitched wailing of my youngest nephew. "Saint Bart's," my mother finally whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound confusion and rising terror. "Tessa, what are you talking about? You are supposed to be in the kitchen. We have a flight to catch in 3 hours. Connor has the car waiting outside. You need to stop playing these ridiculous games and come downstairs right now." "I am not playing a game, Mother," I replied, tracing the rim of my crystal flute with one finger. "I am thousands of miles away from Atlanta. I left the estate yesterday evening. I suggest you take off your designer gala gown before you attempt to clean up whatever your grandchildren just broke in the foyer." A sudden violent scuffle broke out on the other end of the line. I heard my mother gasp as the phone was aggressively snatched from her hands. Nia's shrill, panicked voice immediately assaulted my ear. "Tessa, you psychotic witch!" Nia screamed, her perfectly curated socialite persona instantly evaporating into pure, unadulterated desperation. "Are you seriously telling me you abandoned my children? Connor and I spent $20,000 on non-refundable first-class tickets to Aspen. Darius and Lauren are standing in the driveway with all their custom ski gear. We are missing the governor's gala right now because my children are running around the house covered in paint. You get your miserable self on a plane and fly back to Atlanta this exact second. You are ruining my entire Christmas." I let her scream until she had to pause for breath. The sheer entitlement radiating from her demands was staggering. They truly believed the universe revolved around their petty desires. "I am not flying anywhere, Nia," I answered, leaning back against the plush outdoor cushions. "I plan to spend the next 10 days receiving deep tissue massages and eating caviar prepared by my private chef. Your Aspen trip is entirely your own problem to solve. You are the parents of those children. Perhaps it is time you actually started acting like it." "You owe us this favor," Nia shrieked, her voice echoing loudly over the speakerphone. "You have no husband, you have no children, you have absolutely no real life. Mom told you to watch the kids and you agreed. You do not get to just walk away from your family duties because you want to pretend you are some wealthy vacationer. You are throwing away your duty to this family." "My duty?" I asked, a cold, sharp laugh escaping my lips. "Let us talk about this supposed family duty, Nia. Let us talk about exactly how much you and Mother truly value my role in this family." I sat forward, the relaxed vacationer completely replaced by the ruthless executive. It was time to systematically dismantle their arrogant delusions. "Last week at the steakhouse, I took a very brief trip to the restroom," I began, my tone dropping into a deadly precise cadence. "I was standing quietly inside one of the stalls when you and Mother walked in. I heard every single word you two said while you were fixing your lipstick. Would you like me to repeat your exact conversation, Nia? Or is your memory functioning well enough to recall your own malicious plotting?" The line fell eerily silent. Even the background noise of the screaming children seemed to momentarily fade as the horrific realization of what I was saying washed over my sister. "I heard Mother tell you that you did not even need to ask me to babysit." I continued, striking them with their own cruel words. "I heard her say you were just going to drop all 6 grandchildren off at the mansion and immediately leave for the airport. I heard her explicitly state that I owed this family my free labor. I heard you both laughing about how I had no real life, how I was just a sad, pathetic woman sitting in a tiny apartment, and how watching your chaotic children for 2 weeks was the absolute least I could do to repay you for simply tolerating my existence." Nia stammered, her voice losing all of its previous aggressive volume. "Tessa, you misunderstood. We were just stressed about the trip. We did not mean it like that." "You meant exactly what you said," I countered fiercely. You thought you were so incredibly clever. You thought you could treat me like a disposable, unpaid servant because you assumed I was too weak and too financially dependent to ever fight back. You built this entire elaborate vacation on the foundation of my exploitation. You expected me to cheerfully sacrifice my holidays, my time, and my peace of mind, just so you could go drink hot toddies in Aspen with your arrogant husbands. Your delusions of grandeur end tonight. Your narrative of family duty is officially dead, and I will never let you use me again. I will not save you tonight, Nia. I refuse to be your doormat. You will suffer the consequences of your own actions. The sharp sound of a violent scuffle echoed through the speaker before a deep, highly aggressive voice replaced my sister's frantic, high-pitched sobbing. Connor had forcefully snatched the device away from Nia. He breathed heavily into the receiver, clearly attempting to project an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. As a wealthy, privileged white tech executive who was completely accustomed to immediate compliance from everyone in his professional and personal orbit, he fully expected me to instantly wither under his profound displeasure. He had spent years treating me like a pathetic, invisible subordinate, and he fundamentally believed he could simply bully me back into submission with a few harsh, commanding words. "Listen to me very carefully, Tessa." Connor growled, his tone dripping with venomous condescension and manufactured toxic dominance. "You are going to stop playing these ridiculous childish games right this very second. I do not care what kind of delusional power trip you think you are currently on. You are going to hang up this phone, get your miserable self on the very next available commercial flight out of wherever the hell you are, and you are going to march back into this house to do your job. Do you understand me? You do not get to dictate terms to this family." I leaned back against the plush outdoor cushions of my luxurious terrace, completely unbothered by his aggressive, desperate posturing. "I do not have a job in your house, Connor. I am not your hired nanny, and I am certainly not your corporate subordinate. I highly suggest you lower your voice before you wake up my private chef." "You are a miserable, ungrateful brat," he shouted, completely losing his polished, carefully curated corporate composure. "We graciously allowed you to participate in our family holidays, and this is how you repay us. By deliberately abandoning 6 innocent children in an empty house. I am not going to tolerate this blatant disrespect, Tessa. If you are not physically standing in this foyer by tomorrow morning, I am calling the Atlanta Police Department. I will personally file formal, severe charges against you for gross child abandonment and criminal neglect. I have very powerful friends in the local district attorney's office. I will make absolutely sure you are locked up and your pathetic little career is entirely ruined. You will never find employment in this city again once I am completely finished destroying your reputation." I let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed beautifully across the warm, tropical breeze of the Caribbean Ocean. The sheer blinding arrogance of his legal threat was incredibly amusing to me. He was so accustomed to weaponizing his status that he had completely forgotten how basic laws actually worked. "Call the police, Connor." I challenged him, keeping my voice perfectly calm and delightfully light. "Please, I beg you to call them right now. Put them on a conference call with me. I would absolutely love to hear you explain to a dispatched police officer how I somehow committed child abandonment when I never once agreed to watch your children. You cannot claim criminal abandonment against a person who never legally or verbally consented to be a caregiver." Connor stuttered, clearly thrown off balance by my complete lack of fear. You knew we were leaving them. You were supposed to be here." "I was supposed to be exactly where I am right now," I countered ruthlessly. "If you call the police, Connor, they are not going to arrest me. They are going to arrest you and Nia for severe child endangerment. You willfully dumped 6 young minors inside an empty house, locked the doors, and attempted to board a flight to Aspen without ensuring a responsible adult was actually present on the premises to supervise them. That is the literal legal definition of reckless endangerment. Furthermore, if you check your security cameras, you will see I vacated the property the second you all left for the governor's gala. So go ahead, dial 911. Let us see how your wealthy investors react when your mugshot is broadcast across the evening news for neglecting your own children." The line fell utterly silent. Connor was trapped in a legal and logical corner of his own making. He realized instantly that my assessment was entirely correct. Any involvement of law enforcement would result in his own immediate arrest, severely jeopardizing his precious public image and his fragile tech company. He breathed heavily into the phone, the silence stretching out like a tight wire waiting to violently snap. "You are an absolute monster, Tessa," he finally hissed, his voice trembling with defeated, impotent rage. "We are supposed to leave for the airport in 2 hours. You are completely ruining a luxury vacation that cost me thousands of dollars. We cannot just cancel our reservations. This trip is critical for my networking." I smiled, taking another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my vintage champagne. It was finally time to drop the ultimate devastating microbomb I had been saving for this precise moment. I had waited years to watch his inflated, arrogant ego completely shatter. "You are not going to Aspen anyway, Connor," I stated smoothly, examining my manicured fingernails in the soft moonlight. "Even if you miraculously found a last-minute babysitter to tolerate your horrific children, you would not be boarding that flight today." "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone shifting from anger to genuine panicked confusion. "I am talking about your finances, Connor," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, clinical whisper. "I highly suggest you log into your banking application right now. Or better yet, try to pay the exorbitant cancellation fees the airline is about to charge you. How exactly do you plan to pay for anything in Aspen, since your primary platinum credit cards were just aggressively declined at the airline counter when your assistant tried to confirm your ski baggage fees?" Connor immediately went absolutely, incredibly, and devastatingly dead silent. Exactly 1 week passed before I returned to the bitter cold of Atlanta. The 10 days I spent in St. Bart's were a masterclass in absolute luxury and profound spiritual renewal. I had completely detached from the manufactured drama of my toxic family, spending my hours negotiating international acquisitions from the deck of a private yacht and sleeping without a single interruption. I stepped out of my chauffeured car and onto the pristine pavement in the heart of the Midtown Financial District. I looked completely revitalized. My skin held a rich golden tan from the Caribbean sun, and I was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray designer power suit that commanded immediate respect. I adjusted the lapels of my jacket and walked through the heavy revolving glass doors of my corporate headquarters. The soaring 50-story skyscraper was a monument of glass and steel, a physical manifestation of the immense power I wielded within the city. The massive marble lobby buzzed with the frantic, nervous energy of entry-level employees and anxious executives rushing to their morning meetings. I moved through the crowd with a slow, deliberate grace, savoring the absolute tranquility I had carried back from the islands. Just as I approached the private security checkpoint that led to the executive elevator banks, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently inside my leather briefcase. I paused, retrieving the device. The screen illuminated with a local unregistered phone number. I rarely answered unknown calls on my private line, but a sharp intuition told me exactly who was on the other end. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Before I could even offer a standard greeting, a voice exploded through the speaker. It was my father, Pastor James. His tone was completely devoid of his usual polished pastoral warmth. Instead, it was an ugly, guttural roar of pure, unfiltered hatred. He sounded entirely unhinged, like a man who had been pushed to the absolute brink of his sanity and was now aggressively lashing out. He demanded to know if I thought my little stunt was funny. He screamed that my intentional absence had caused catastrophic damage to the family estate. The 6 children had completely destroyed the antique furniture in the West Wing before my mother and Nia could strip off their designer gowns to wrangle them. They had missed the prestigious Governor's Gala entirely. Connor had spent the entire holiday weekend furiously arguing with creditors on the phone, desperately trying to salvage his failing tech company after his credit cards were brutally declined at the airline counter. Their luxurious, status-defining trip to Aspen was permanently canceled, and the resulting social embarrassment had severely damaged my father's standing among his wealthy elite congregation. I listened to his furious, breathless rant, without interrupting, casually inspecting my flawless manicure as he screamed. I simply let him exhaust his limited vocabulary of insults. When he finally paused to catch his breath, I spoke with a quiet, lethal calmness. I asked him why he was calling from an unknown number instead of using his own device. He let out a harsh, vindictive laugh that echoed terribly against the marble walls of the lobby. He proudly announced that he was calling from a burner phone because he wanted to personally deliver the news of my impending destruction without leaving a direct digital trail. He told me that I had made a fatal miscalculation by humiliating a man of his immense social standing. He bragged that he had spent the entire week methodically leveraging his vast network of mega church connections to utterly annihilate my pathetic little life. He firmly believed that I was merely a mid-level financial analyst, a disposable low-ranking corporate drone who desperately relied on a meager salary to survive. He aggressively declared that nobody disrespects the pastor of the largest congregation in Atlanta and escapes without severe life-altering consequences. He promised me that by the time he was finished, I would be completely unemployable, utterly destitute, and crawling back to his mansion on my hands and knees to beg for his forgiveness. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused by his profound delusion. I asked him exactly how he planned to accomplish this spectacular ruin. His voice dripped with arrogant satisfaction as he revealed his masterstroke. He boldly claimed that he had bypassed human resources entirely and gone straight to the top of the food chain. He proudly announced that he had personally called the supreme executive leadership of the very investment firm where he believed I was currently employed. He wanted to make absolutely certain that my termination was immediate, brutal, and completely irreversible. He stated that he had leveraged a very specific, highly influential relationship with a man who sat on my company's board of directors, a wealthy white businessman who happened to be one of the most generous prominent donors to his church's expansion project. My father firmly believed he had just delivered the ultimate devastating kill shot to my career. He expected me to burst into tears, to panic, and to immediately start pleading for my job. Instead, I stood in the center of the grand lobby, surrounded by bustling corporate professionals, and I simply smiled. The sheer magnificent irony of his threat was almost too exquisite to process. He had unwittingly marched directly into the most lethal trap imaginable. His entire plan of absolute destruction relied heavily on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I truly was and what I actually controlled. He assumed I was a powerless subordinate entirely at the mercy of wealthy executives. He had no idea that I was the predator waiting silently at the absolute top of the financial hierarchy. I adjusted my leather briefcase, took a slow, incredibly steadying breath, and prepared to ask him the one specific, carefully calculated question that would eventually unravel his entire arrogant existence and bring his beloved empire crashing violently to the ground. "Exactly how do you plan to orchestrate my professional ruin, Father?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level as I strolled past the bustling reception desk. "I am genuinely curious to know the precise mechanics of your brilliant strategy." My father let out a loud, highly arrogant laugh that crackled harshly through my shiny smartphone speaker. He was absolutely reveling in his perceived dominance, fully convinced he had successfully cornered his disobedient daughter. "You thought you could keep your little job a secret from me, Tessa. You thought I did not know you were a lowly entry-level financial analyst at Vanguard Holdings. You vastly underestimate the reach of my congregation. I know everything about your pathetic corporate existence." I paused near a massive marble pillar, allowing a few junior associates to hurry past me. I had deliberately allowed my family to believe I was a struggling analyst for the past 8 years. It was the perfect camouflage. "Please continue," I prompted smoothly. "I am fascinated to hear what you did next." "I made a personal phone call this morning." My father bragged, his tone dripping with arrogant vindication. "I reached out directly to the man who signs your meager paychecks. I called Harrison Sterling, the head of Vanguard Holdings. Harrison is an incredibly prominent donor to my church's new community center project. We play golf together at the country club every single month." When I explained to him exactly what kind of morally bankrupt, selfish, and deceitful woman he had working in his cubicles, he was absolutely appalled. "Is that right?" I murmured, shifting my leather briefcase to my other hand. The sheer absurdity of his lie was spectacular. Harrison Sterling was indeed a powerful man in Atlanta, but he was not the head of Vanguard Holdings. He was my chief operating officer. I had personally hired Harrison 5 years ago, and he reported exclusively to me. He promised me he would handle your termination personally. My father declared, his voice rising in triumphant volume. Harrison assured me that Vanguard Holdings has a very strict morality clause in their employment contracts. He said he would not tolerate a staff member who willfully abandons her own family and neglects innocent children on Christmas Eve. By the end of business today, your keycard will be deactivated. Security will escort you out of the building with your belongings in a cardboard box, exactly like the failure you are. Before I could even respond to his magnificent delusion, the sound of a phone being shuffled echoed over the line. A new, sharply condescending voice cut through the connection. Lauren had evidently been listening eagerly on speakerphone the entire time. "I hope you enjoyed your little tropical vacation, Tessa," Lauren sneered, her voice laced with venomous delight. "Because it is absolutely the last vacation you will ever afford. Darius and I were just discussing how quickly you are going to lose that sad little apartment of yours now that you are unemployed. How exactly do you plan to pay your rent? Are you going to ask Connor for a job again? Because I can promise you that offer is permanently off the table." "Good morning, Lauren," I replied warmly. "I see you managed to clean the paint off your designer ski suit. How was your quiet weekend at home with the children?" "You are a vicious, heartless witch," Lauren shrieked, instantly abandoning her haughty composure. "My kids were traumatized by your abandonment. You owe us thousands of dollars for the ruined Aspen trip. But do not worry, your father took care of everything. You are going to be completely destitute by sunset. I cannot wait to watch you crawl back to this family begging for a handout. I would not hold my breath waiting for that," I stated calmly, stepping away from the marble pillar and walking purposefully toward the private, restricted elevator banks reserved exclusively for executive leadership. "You are in deep denial, Tessa," my father interjected, taking control of the conversation once more. "Harrison Sterling is a man of his word. He respects the authority of the church, and he respects me. He understands that a woman who rebels against her father and destroys her family's reputation is a major liability to his corporate culture. You brought this righteous judgment entirely upon yourself. The Lord punishes the wicked, and today, Harrison Sterling is the instrument of that holy retribution." I approached the sleek, brushed steel doors of the private elevator. A uniformed security guard stood at attention nearby. He immediately straightened his posture and offered me a respectful nod as I neared the restricted access panel. I did not break my stride. "I find it incredibly fascinating that Harrison made you all of these firm promises," I said, a dangerous edge creeping into my calm voice. "Did he happen to mention what time this supposed termination would take place? I want to make sure my schedule is completely clear for my dramatic exit." "You think this is a joke?" my father growled, his anger flaring at my blatant lack of panic. "You think you can mock me? I am Pastor James. I built this community. I will make sure every single financial institution in Atlanta knows exactly what kind of treacherous, untrustworthy woman you are. Your career in this city is completely finished. You will be blacklisted by every major firm before lunchtime." "That sounds incredibly thorough," I replied, watching the digital numbers above the elevator softly illuminate. "You really have thought of everything, Father. You and Lauren must be very proud of yourselves for orchestrating such a flawless, foolproof plan to ruin my life." "We are simply teaching you a necessary lesson about respect and family loyalty," Lauren chimed in defensively. "You brought this entirely on yourself by acting like you are somehow better than us." I smiled, unbothered by her insults. "Goodbye, Father. Enjoy the consequences of your blind arrogance." I tapped the screen, ending the ridiculous call immediately. I slipped my phone into my pocket. I stood in front of the imposing brushed steel doors of the private executive elevator. The security guard stepped aside with a deeply respectful nod. I retrieved my biometric black card and swiped it over the scanner. The doors parted silently. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the 50th floor penthouse. As the elevator shot upward, I allowed myself a moment of pure amusement. My father, Pastor James, had truly outdone himself in his blinding arrogance. He honestly believed he possessed the power to destroy my livelihood. He thought Harrison Sterling, a man who answered directly to me, would toss me onto the street. The profound irony was almost too delicious to bear. The elevator glided to a seamless halt. The doors slid open to reveal the absolute pinnacle of corporate power. The 50th floor was an immaculate sanctuary of glass and marble designed entirely to project absolute authority. Standing nervously in the reception area was Harrison Sterling himself. Harrison possessed the polished aesthetic of traditional old money privilege. To the outside world, Harrison appeared to be the ultimate boss. But within these walls, the power dynamic was fiercely and unequivocally reversed. As I stepped out, Harrison immediately straightened his posture, smoothing his silk tie. "Good morning, Madam Chairman." Harrison greeted me, dipping his head in absolute submission. "Welcome back from your vacation. I trust St. Bart's was restful." "It was incredibly illuminating, Harrison," I replied, handing my briefcase to an assistant. "I understand you had a rather interesting phone call this morning from a Pastor James. I believe he demanded my immediate termination for moral bankruptcy." Harrison visibly paled. The panic in his eyes was authentic. He knew exactly who my father was and the volatile nature of the situation. "Madam Chairman, I assure you I was entirely blindsided by his call. He spent 20 minutes demanding that I fire a mid-level analyst named Tessa. He claimed this analyst was a toxic liability. I realized immediately he meant you, but I maintained my composure. I told him I would handle it personally, exactly as you instructed when dealing with your family's delusions." I offered a slow smile. "You handled it perfectly, Harrison. Pastor James assumes I am currently packing my desk into a box. He firmly believes his influence in this city is absolute. It is time we properly educated him on the actual hierarchy of power." I walked past him, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor as I headed toward my massive corner office. Harrison hurried to keep pace, clutching a thick leather portfolio to his chest. "What are your orders, Madam Chairman?" he asked, his voice tight with nervous anticipation. "We are going to orchestrate a reckoning," I stated, pushing open the heavy glass doors to my office. The panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline stretched out behind my massive custom-built obsidian desk. "I want you to pull the complete financial dossiers on two specific accounts. First, I need the comprehensive debt profile for a tech startup called Novatech, owned by a man named Connor. Second, I want the full auditing records for the $5 million expansion loan currently held by my father's megachurch." Harrison nodded rapidly, opening his portfolio. "I already have the preliminary files prepared, Tessa. Novatech is bleeding capital at a catastrophic rate. Connor has officially submitted an emergency request for a $10 million Series B bailout from our venture capital division. Without our immediate intervention, his company will file for bankruptcy within 30 days. "And the church loan?" I asked, taking my seat at the head of the dark desk. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the meticulously organized financial documents. For 8 long, grueling years, I had painstakingly built Vanguard Holdings from a modest boutique investment firm into a ruthless multi-billion-dollar financial juggernaut. While my family was busy mocking my quiet demeanor and dismissing my potential, I was ruthlessly acquiring assets, outsmarting seasoned Wall Street veterans, and establishing an unbreakable monopoly in the Atlanta real estate market. I never flaunted my wealth because I knew exactly how my greedy, status-obsessed relatives would react. They would have immediately demanded access to my capital, bleeding me dry, to fund their superficial, materialistic lives. By hiding in plain sight as a seemingly invisible, low-ranking employee, I had successfully protected my empire from their toxic entitlement. Now the camouflage was no longer necessary. The protective shield was coming off, and the sword was being drawn. "Pastor James has repeatedly violated the financial covenants of the expansion loan," Harrison reported, sliding a thick file across the desk. "He has been illegally diverting church donation funds to cover personal, highly lavish expenses. From a strictly legal standpoint, Vanguard Holdings has every right to immediately call in the debt and seize the church property as collateral." I opened the file, scanning the undeniable proof of my father's financial hypocrisy. He had built his entire identity on preaching sacrifice and moral superiority while secretly using his congregation as a personal piggy bank to fund his extravagant lifestyle. Connor was drowning in debt, desperately trying to maintain his arrogant white tech bro facade while his company rapidly disintegrated. They were both completely, utterly trapped. Harrison, I commanded, locking eyes with my chief operating officer. I want you to formally invite Connor and Pastor James to an exclusive investor meeting here in the main glass boardroom tomorrow morning. Tell them the supreme executive leadership of Vanguard Holdings is ready to finalize their financial requests. Instruct them to bring their wives. Tell them this is a grand celebration of their incredible success. I want them to feel perfectly safe and secure in their arrogance. I will show them what happens when you underestimate the silent daughter. By tomorrow morning, I am going to burn their entire pathetic fake empire completely to the very ashes. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the towering glass facade of the Vanguard Holdings skyscraper. Inside the massive marble lobby, my family arrived exactly as I knew they would, dripping in performative wealth and blind arrogance. Connor strutted through the revolving doors wearing an Italian suit, flashing a custom platinum watch that he absolutely could not afford. He walked with the exaggerated swagger of a man who believed he had just successfully conned a major financial institution into saving his disastrous tech startup. My sister Nia walked closely beside him, draped in a conspicuous designer coat, clutching a limited edition handbag like a shield of superiority. My father, Pastor James, practically radiated unearned authority. He wore his finest tailored pastoral suit, offering condescending smiles to the security personnel as if he were bestowing a holy blessing upon the working class. My mother Vivian walked arm in arm with Lauren and Darius, the three of them chatting animatedly about their impending wealth. They approached the main reception desk with loud, abrasive confidence, demanding immediate access to the executive penthouse. Connor loudly informed the receptionist that they were expected by the supreme executive leadership for a highly confidential multi-million-dollar investor meeting. The receptionist, who had been thoroughly briefed on the morning protocol, offered a polite smile and handed them temporary visitor badges. She directed them toward the private executive elevator. As the doors closed and the elevator rocketed toward the 50th floor, the confined space filled with their toxic, boastful conversation. I watched them through the discreet security cameras installed in the elevator cab, the high-definition audio feeding directly into my office. Nia laughed loudly, adjusting her diamond necklace. She told Lauren that she planned to spend at least $200,000 of Connor's new bailout money on a complete renovation of their vacation home. Lauren enthusiastically agreed, adding that Darius was going to demand a massive executive salary increase once the church expansion loan was formally finalized. My father proudly interrupted their shallow chatter. He boldly declared that today was a historic day of monumental victory for their family legacy. He reminded them all that his personal connections had made this entire corporate miracle possible. Then my mother brought up my name. Vivian sighed, dramatically expressing fake pity for my current situation. She wondered aloud if I had finished packing my miserable apartment yet, fully believing I was currently unemployed and completely destitute because of my father's ruthless phone call yesterday. Connor snorted with absolute derision. He stated that I was probably crying in a cheap coffee shop, desperately searching for minimum wage jobs online. He bragged that firing me was the best decision Harrison Sterling had ever made. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to the penthouse level. A silent, impeccably dressed junior assistant escorted my arrogant family down the wide, art-filled corridor and directly into the main glass boardroom. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. A massive mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by plush leather executive chairs. Crystal water pitchers and coffee carafes were perfectly arranged at the center. My family eagerly took their seats, completely mesmerized by the scent of wealth and unchecked corporate power. Connor leaned far back in his heavy leather chair, crossing his ankles and resting his expensive leather shoes directly on the edge of the pristine mahogany table. He looked around the immaculate room with a greedy smirk. Pastor James sat near the head of the table, folding his hands piously, fully prepared to accept the praise and the millions he believed were coming. Inside my private executive office, Harrison and I stood side by side in front of the massive wall monitors, watching a live feed of the glass boardroom. The high-definition microphones picked up every single whisper, every arrogant chuckle, and every venomous complaint they uttered while they waited for the executives to arrive. Connor was pacing at the front of the room, running his hand along the smooth mahogany table as if he already owned it. He looked nervously at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, adjusting his tie. Despite his outward swagger, the financial desperation was practically leaking out of his pores. "When the chief operating officer comes in," Connor instructed the room, his voice tight. "Let me do the talking. Vanguard Holdings is notoriously aggressive, but they are clearly desperate to get a piece of Novatech. I am going to let them think they have the upper hand, and then I will lock in the 10 million. Once the funds clear, we can finally rebook the Aspen trip for New Year's Eve." Nia scoffed, stirring a packet of raw sugar into her crystal coffee cup. "Thank God. The past 10 days have been an absolute living nightmare. I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night. The kids completely destroyed the guest wing, and I had to physically scrub marker off the walls myself. Can you believe the sheer audacity of Tessa leaving us stranded like that?" Lauren shuddered, dramatically crossing her arms. "Do not even speak her name. My children's digestive systems are still recovering from the processed garbage they ate while we were at the gala. Your sister is deeply mentally unwell, Nia. It is the only explanation. Normal people do not just walk away from their family duties." "She is just bitter," Darius chimed in, leaning back in his plush leather chair and putting his feet up on the lower rung of the table. "She knows she is a failure. She probably cracked under the pressure of seeing how successful we all are. But it doesn't matter now. Dad took care of it. She is out on the street exactly where she belongs." My father, Pastor James, nodded solemnly from the head of the table. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of hypocritical piety. "The Lord removes the toxic elements from our lives, so that we may prosper," he preached to the empty boardroom. Tessa made her choice. She chose rebellion over submission. And because of my swift action, she has lost her meager livelihood. She will learn her place when she is hungry enough. Today, we must focus on the abundant blessings Vanguard is about to bestow upon this family. This expansion loan forgiveness will solidify my legacy in this city forever. Harrison, standing next to me in the surveillance room, let out a low, disgusted breath. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound respect for my restraint. "They are completely untethered from reality, Madam Chairman. They are sitting in your building drinking your coffee, waiting to beg for your money, and they are still insulting you." "Arrogance is an incredibly powerful anesthetic, Harrison," I replied calmly, buttoning my tailored crimson jacket. "It completely numbs you to the reality of your own impending doom. They honestly believe they are the main characters of the universe. They think Vanguard Holdings is bowing to them. They have spent my entire life writing a script where I am the pathetic, invisible loser, and they simply cannot comprehend a plot twist." "Connor is literally bankrupt," Harrison muttered, watching the screen as Connor confidently pointed finger guns at his own reflection. "If we do not wire him that 10 million today, he will default on his payroll by tomorrow morning. He will face federal indictments for the user acquisition fraud by Friday. And your father? The audit on his church loan is a direct violation of federal tax laws. They are standing on a trapdoor with a rope around their necks. And they tied the knots themselves," I stated, picking up the stack of thick red financial folders from my desk. The weight of the documents felt incredibly satisfying in my hands. The forensic accounting was flawless. The trap was fully primed. "Are you ready, Madam Chairman?" Harrison asked, straightening his posture and slipping perfectly into his role as my loyal subordinate. "I have been ready for 33 years. I answered, my voice steady, cold, and absolute. "Let us go show them exactly what the invisible, incompetent sister has been doing with her time." I walked out of my office, Harrison trailing exactly one step behind my right shoulder, and signaled the 4 elite corporate lawyers waiting in the corridor to follow us. They poured themselves hot coffee and laughed about their impending riches, completely comfortable in their fabricated triumph. They waited eagerly for the mysterious, wealthy corporate executives to finally arrive and hand them their salvation. 2 minutes later, the heavy double doors at the back of the boardroom swung open. The boastful conversation around the table instantly ceased. My family collectively straightened their posture, putting on their most charming, persuasive smiles. I walked into the room wearing a custom-tailored crimson suit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. Harrison Sterling walked exactly one step behind my right shoulder, carrying a thick stack of red financial folders. A team of 4 elite corporate lawyers trailed silently behind us, their faces carved out of solid stone. I walked the entire length of the long boardroom in complete agonizing silence. My family stared at me. Their initial expressions were not of fear, but of highly offended confusion. They simply could not process my presence in this restricted space. Nia immediately scoffed, rolling her eyes in deep annoyance. She demanded to know why the recently fired disgraced sister was serving them coffee during their private executive investor meeting. Lauren added a cruel, snapping remark, telling me I was completely humiliating the family by showing up here to desperately beg for my pathetic analyst job back. Connor aggressively slammed his hand flat on the mahogany table, commanding me to get out of the room before he personally called security to physically throw me out. I did not flinch. I did not stop walking. I bypassed the beverage station completely and moved directly to the very head of the boardroom table. I pulled out the massive, high-backed chairman's seat and sat down smoothly, resting my hands firmly on the polished wood. Harrison Sterling immediately stepped forward, positioning himself like a loyal guard directly beside my chair. He looked down at my furious, bewildered family with a cold, unwavering professional stare. Harrison cleared his throat loudly, demanding their absolute silence. He then gestured respectfully toward me and formally introduced me to the room. He stated clearly and loudly that I was not a terminated employee. He announced that I was the founder, the majority shareholder, and the supreme chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings. The arrogant, condescending smiles evaporated into sheer, unadulterated, absolute horror and pure shock. The silence that followed Harrison Sterling's declaration was profound, heavy, and fragile. For several agonizing seconds, no one in my family moved a muscle. They stared at me, their eyes darting wildly between my tailored crimson suit and Harrison's deadly serious expression. The cognitive dissonance was entirely too massive for their arrogant brains to process. Connor was the first person to finally break the suffocating quiet. He let out a loud, nervous bark of laughter, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at Harrison with a forced, trembling smirk, desperately hoping this was merely an elaborate prank. "That is a phenomenal joke, Harrison." Connor stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous booming authority. "You really had us going for a second there. Now can we please remove the former secretary from the boardroom? We have a highly confidential venture capital deal to finalize, and I do not want this disgruntled woman anywhere near my proprietary financial data." Harrison did not laugh. He did not even blink. He adjusted his suit jacket and looked down at my brother-in-law with pure, unadulterated disgust. "I assure you, Connor, I do not make jokes regarding our corporate hierarchy. Madam Chairman Tessa built Vanguard Holdings entirely from the ground up over the past 8 years. She personally hired me to manage the daily operations. She is the sole ultimate authority in this room, in this building, and over every single financial portfolio you desperately wish to access. You will address her with the absolute respect her position demands, or I will have security physically drag you out of this skyscraper by your expensive lapels." Lauren gasped loudly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Nia visibly slumped backward into her plush leather chair, all color instantly draining completely away. My mother. Vivian began taking short, rapid breaths, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life preserver. My father. Pastor James gripped the edge of the mahogany table. His knuckles turned stark white as the horrifying reality finally began to penetrate his stubborn, patriarchal delusion. "Tessa," my father whispered, his voice cracking violently under the immense weight of the revelation. "You own Vanguard Holdings. But I called Harrison yesterday. I told him to terminate your employment. And Harrison did exactly what I pay him millions of dollars a year to do, father," I replied, leaning forward very slowly. "He placated your blinding arrogance and reported the incident directly to me. I have spent years listening to you proudly brag about your elite corporate connections, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the unseen predator controlling the very banks you relied upon. You thought you could destroy my pathetic little life with a single phone call. Instead, you merely accelerated your own spectacular ruin. I reached over to the stack of files Harrison had placed beside me. I picked up the thick black leather folder containing the Novatech financial dossier and tossed it forcefully entirely face down. It slid smoothly across the wood, stopping exactly inches from Connor's trembling hands. Let us begin with your highly anticipated $10 million bailout, Connor. I announced, my voice echoing with lethal precision. You walked in here today fully expecting to secure the capital required to save your disastrous technology startup. You spent the entire elevator ride mocking my supposed unemployment, entirely confident in your own fabricated brilliance. But the numbers inside that folder tell a remarkably different, thoroughly pathetic story. Connor stared down at the black folder as if it were a venomous snake, sweating profusely and panicking now. Novatech is a catastrophic failure. I continued dissecting his business with surgical cruelty. You have an unsustainable monthly burn rate. You have missed your last two critical payroll cycles. Most importantly, my forensic analyst discovered that you have been deliberately and fraudulently inflating your user acquisition metrics for the past 18 months. You committed federal financial fraud to artificially boost your valuation, Connor. You are not a visionary tech genius. You are a desperate, incompetent con artist bleeding cash. Tessa, please, Connor begged, his voice dropping into a humiliating, high-pitched whine. You have to understand massive market pressure. I just need a bridge loan to stabilize the platform. We are family. You cannot just let my company completely collapse. I can, and I absolutely will, I countered sharply. Your application for the $10 million bailout is officially and permanently denied. Furthermore, because Vanguard Holdings currently holds the initial $3 million seed loan you secured 2 years ago, I am officially triggering the penalty clause for fraudulent accounting. I am calling in that debt effective immediately. You have exactly 30 days to repay the $3 million in full. Connor, or Vanguard will seize absolutely everything completely. We will liquidate your remaining assets and force you into total personal bankruptcy. Nia let out a piercing, hysterical sob, burying her face in her hands. The luxurious status-defining life she had built around Connor's fake wealth was rapidly disintegrating before her very eyes. I ignored her theatrics completely. I picked up the second file, a dense red folder, and dropped it onto the table. I shifted my unwavering gaze directly to my father, who was staring at me with a mixture of profound terror and rising defensive anger. Now let us discuss the sacred church business accounts, Father. 3 years ago, Vanguard Holdings approved a $5 million commercial loan to finance your highly publicized mega-church community center expansion. You stood at the pulpit and told your devoted congregation that the Lord had miraculously provided the necessary capital. My father swallowed hard. Tessa, whatever grievances you have with me, do not bring the Holy Church into this. We are doing the Lord's vital work. You are doing nothing but funding your own vanity, I snapped. My auditors discovered a massive, systematic, and highly illegal diversion of corporate loan funds. You are embezzling Vanguard capital right now, period. The silence in the room deepened into a suffocating, paralyzing void. My father, the supposedly untouchable moral compass of Atlanta, shrank in his leather chair. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a raspy wheeze escaped his lips. The righteous fury he usually wielded from the pulpit was completely eradicated, replaced by the raw terror of a cornered criminal. He looked around the pristine boardroom, desperately seeking a friendly face. But my legal team stared back at him with absolute, unyielding apathy. You cannot do this to your own father. He stammered, his voice weak and trembling. I built that church from nothing. It is my entire legacy, Tessa. If you expose these confidential files, the federal authorities will intervene. I will lose my congregation, my social standing, and my freedom. You would be sending your own flesh and blood to federal prison. You sent yourself to prison the moment you decided to steal $5 million from my corporation to fund your materialistic vanity. I replied coldly, leaning back in my seat. You preached sacrifice to me my entire life. You demanded that I accept my role as the invisible, insignificant daughter. Now you get to experience the ultimate sacrifice. I am calling in the church expansion loan. My legal team will seize the property by tomorrow morning. Your fabricated legacy is permanently over. Connor buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic groan of absolute despair. The horrifying realization of his complete financial ruin finally shattered his tech bro facade. He was completely bankrupt, exposed, and defenseless. Lauren and Nia, realizing the luxurious foundation of their existence was evaporating in real time, completely broke down. They abandoned their haughty, superior postures and burst into frantic, hysterical tears right at the boardroom table. "Tessa, please," Nia begged, tears streaming down her face and ruining her makeup. She reached across the mahogany table, her hands shaking violently. "We are blood. We are your family. You cannot just destroy our lives like this. We will lose our houses. We will lose our cars. How are Connor and I supposed to raise our children without any money? You have to show us mercy. We are sisters." "Sisters?" I asked, raising an eyebrow with icy amusement. "Let me remind you of exactly how you treat your sister. A week ago, you both sat in a restaurant restroom and plotted to dump your 6 children at an empty house so you could drink champagne in Aspen. You called me a sad woman with no real life. When I refused to be your unpaid servant, you screamed at me over the telephone. Connor threatened to call the police and have me arrested for child abandonment. My father called my chief operating officer and demanded that I be fired and left destitute." I stood up slowly, buttoning my crimson jacket with precision. I looked down at the miserable, weeping people who shared my DNA. They were hollow shells of beings stripped of their unearned wealth and superiority. "You threw me away because you firmly believed I possessed no value," I stated, my voice echoing with devastating finality in the glass room. "You were completely comfortable discarding me when you thought I was poor and defenseless. You demanded my compliance and offered me nothing but disdain in return. Now that you finally see the actual hierarchy of power, you want to use our bloodline as a convenient shield against your own failures. It simply does not work that way." Lauren sobbed loudly, clutching Darius's arm. Darius just stared blankly at the polished wooden table, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the financial destruction raining down upon them. "We desperately need you, Tessa," my mother cried, her voice cracking as she found the courage to speak. "We will do anything you want. We will apologize to everyone. Just please do not take everything away from us." I looked at the woman who had happily handed me a $4,000 dinner bill just days ago, fully expecting me to quietly absorb the massive cost of her insatiable vanity. I felt nothing for her. My heart was devoid of any familial attachment. "You desperately need me," I acknowledged softly, offering her a cold, empty smile. "But the beautiful truth is that I no longer need any of you to survive." I turned to my chief operating officer, who was standing perfectly still beside my leather chair. "Harrison, please instruct building security to immediately escort these individuals off the premises. Ensure they do not take an item from this boardroom. Have the legal team finalize the default notices for Novatech and the church loan before noon today. I want the asset seizure process initiated immediately." "It will be done exactly as you have commanded, Madam Chairman," Harrison replied, nodding respectfully. I picked up my briefcase from the mahogany table. The frantic, desperate pleading of my family escalated into a deafening chorus of wails and useless, hollow apologies. Nia screamed my name over and over again, begging for a second chance. Connor openly wept, finally realizing his fraudulent empire was permanently eradicated. My father stared at the floor, completely broken, silently weeping, and stripped of all his manufactured religious authority. I completely ignored every single one of their agonizing cries. I did not offer them a single ounce of mercy because they had never once offered me an ounce of genuine respect. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom. My private jet was idling on the tarmac, fully prepared to take me to Tokyo for a highly lucrative international acquisition meeting with my new partners. I stepped out into the quiet, immaculate corporate hallway, leaving my incredibly toxic family completely trapped inside the large glass room, entirely ruined forever by their own monumental hubris and insatiable greed. The heavy doors clicked firmly shut behind me, permanently sealing their ultimate devastating fate, and I walked away completely free, never looking back. The drive to the private aviation terminal was a quiet, triumphant victory lap. The Atlanta skyline rolled past the tinted windows of my armored SUV, no longer a city of suffocating expectations, but a chessboard where I had just delivered a flawless checkmate. When I stepped onto the tarmac, the sleek Gulfstream jet was already whining with immense restrained power. Marcus was waiting for me at the top of the air stairs holding a secure digital tablet. "Welcome back, Madam Chairman," he said with his signature unflappable efficiency. "The flight path to Tokyo is fully cleared. We have a tailwind, so we should arrive slightly ahead of schedule for your dinner with the logistics board." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, taking my seat in the opulent leather-clad cabin. "What is the current status of the asset seizures?" Marcus swiped the screen of the tablet and handed it to me. "The legal team executed the default notices exactly as you instructed. It has already hit the local press." I looked down at the glowing screen. The breaking news alerts were an absolute masterpiece of public ruin. The top headline on the primary Atlanta financial blog read, "Nova Tech collapses CEO, Connor Prescott faces federal fraud investigation after massive default." The article detailed how investors had fled in terror after a major unnamed private equity firm uncovered catastrophic financial discrepancies. Connor's assets were officially frozen. His luxury vehicles were currently being repossessed from his driveway, and his arrogant tech empire had evaporated into thin air in less than 4 hours. Directly beneath that article was a much larger, more scandalous headline from the city's leading newspaper, "Fall from Grace. Megachurch property seized amidst shocking embezzlement allegations against Pastor James." The report confirmed that local authorities were actively securing the church grounds. My father's meticulously crafted holy facade had been violently ripped away, exposing him to his entire wealthy congregation as nothing more than a common materialistic thief. The social annihilation would be absolute and unforgiving. Lauren and Darius, whose entire identities were wrapped in the church's prestige, would be completely ostracized from their beloved high society circles by sunset. I locked the tablet and handed it back to Marcus. There was no lingering guilt. There was no sadness. I had simply held up a mirror to their own toxic, greedy actions, and the reflection had destroyed them. The jet engines roared to life, pressing me gently back into my seat as the aircraft accelerated down the runway. As we lifted off, piercing through the thick gray clouds and soaring up into the brilliant, blinding sunlight of the stratosphere, I finally let out a long, peaceful breath. I was no longer Tessa, the invisible, disappointing middle child. I was the architect of my own destiny, a titan of industry, and a woman who had successfully burned a toxic history to the ground to illuminate her own limitless future. I poured myself a single glass of champagne, toasted the empty blue sky outside